And hello, welcome everyone who's watching. We are so pleased to have artist Brad Anthony Bernard and performer musician Be Free here to discuss the Nari Ward sculpture Apollo Pole, which is located at the Wisconsin Center, 400 West Wisconsin Avenue. This monumental sculpture can be viewed at any time, day or night, free, COVID safe. So if you haven't seen it, definitely take a walk up Wisconsin Avenue and look at it. It needs to be experienced physically. Often working with found materials, Nari Ward keeps his practice entwined with life, politics, and social realities. Using language, architecture, and a variety of sculptural forms, Ward examines racism and power, migration and national identity, as well as the layers of historical memory that comprise our sense of community and our sense of belonging. The sculpture on view in Milwaukee, called Apollo Pole, was commissioned for Socrates Sculpture Park in Queens, New York in 2017, where it was shown outdoors. Since then, the sculpture has been shown in various museums as part of Nari Ward's touring exhibition called We the People. This show originated at the New Museum in New York last year. The fact that it has landed now on an urban street corner in downtown Milwaukee on the precipice of a presidential election is both potent and meaningful. Referring to Apollo Pole, Ward said that, quote, many meanings slip and slide together in this work, including the urgent issue of voting. We are very fortunate to have Brad Anthony Bernard here to discuss this work with performer Be Free. Brad Anthony Bernard is an artist, community art educator, and muralist. He earned his bachelor's degree from the Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design in 1993 and his MFA from the University of Mississippi in Oxford in 2000. He taught for 7 years in the art department at Mount Mary University, and he is currently a professor at the Milwaukee Institute of Art and Design. In addition to teaching, Brad's work has been included in many exhibitions, including Wisconsin 30, in conjunction with the 30 Americans exhibition at the Milwaukee Art Museum. In 2010, Bernard founded the Community Arts and Funk Festival and coordinated festivals at the Marcus Center for the Performing Arts, Peck Pavilion, and at Washington Park. Be Free, also known as Brittany Freeman Farr, is a singer, producer, and multi-instrumentalist who currently serves as the music educator coordinator at 88.9 Radio, where she also is in charge of the youth music program titled Grace Weber's Music Lab. Be Free is a Milwaukee native, trained in flute, voice, and piano, who has earned degrees in musical studies from the Milwaukee High School of the Arts, Lincoln University of Pennsylvania, and Vandercook College of Music in Chicago. The release of her album, The Ode to a Love Affair, was hailed as the #1 Milwaukee album by the Journal Sentinel in 2017. Having performed in venues throughout the country, Be Free has shared stages with a variety of artists and was the opening act for Janelle Monáe's Milwaukee Summerfest concert in 2018. So welcome, Brad and Brittany.
Thank you for having us. I've had the pleasure of seeing Be Free perform on a handful of occasions, and I've always been greatly impressed
Thank you.
with her musical abilities and her performances. And so this is just a great opportunity to get to know you a little bit better and hear some insights from you in regards to the arts in Milwaukee.
And I'm always interested in connecting with other artists in the city as well on different types of mediums. So this is a really great opportunity for me with you as well.
Oh, beautiful, beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll jump right into my task here, just kind of shed some light, a little bit more light on Nari Ward and his works. And I think the fact that Milwaukee is in position to be able to house one of his pieces is great. And especially his story, him as a Jamaica-born native who moved to the United States in Harlem, New York at the age of 12. He is kind of the example of what someone might pursue as part of the American dream, right? But, you know, in that, he got his BA from City University of New York, Hunter College in 1989, and an MFA from the City University of New York, Brooklyn College in 92. But much to what Deborah just brought up, he's best known for his sculpture installations composed of discarded material found and collected in his neighborhood. He has repurposed objects such as baby strollers, shopping carts, bottles, doors, television sets, cash registers, shoelaces, among other things, right? So he might have looked like a junk man while gathering objects for his artwork. But that being said, the term used to describe him upon his website is bricoleur. Sounds like a French word of sorts, but basically a bricoleur is a person who creates a bricolage. But a bricoleur could be a person such as a writer, a visual artist, or someone who creates using a diverse range of materials. And so even within the visual arts themselves, there's quite a resource about how we repurpose objects and things to give them new meaning. And that's kind of the core of what Nari Ward does. He explores themes in imagery in the African-American culture, such as sports, politics, identity, and place. He investigates the power of hidden histories of objects. And we know that many different objects might serve purposes culturally that technology may oftentimes cancel out, right? So I think it's important that he's using these contemporary objects that are recognizable as public artifact. But within those African-American traditions of weaving, wrapping, recycling, as my mother used to say, you take what you got, you make what you need, right? So oftentimes African-Americans in this country have had to be resourceful about how they utilize the resources they do have access to, which offers a context of a broader conversation there. Mm-hmm. But, the thing about Ward is he recontextualizes the found objects in different thought-provoking ways to create conversations and dialogue. Even when we look at this piece here, this is one of his more iconic works, Amazing Grace. This was produced in 1993 as part of his residency at Studio Museum in Harlem. And it was really a response to the AIDS epidemic and the crack war, the war on drugs, or war on black bodies that was started in the Reagan administration much earlier before that. But this installation in itself gathered more than 365 discarded baby strollers. And the strollers themselves are bound with twisted fire hoses that he found in an abandoned fire station in Harlem. So, I mean, even when you look at how this installation is put together, it's like the unseen babies that once occupied those strollers are holding court, right? But then within this exhibition, he had piped in a repeating loop of Mahalia Jackson, renowned gospel singer of the mid-20th century, her singing Amazing Grace. And we know we probably heard that most recently at a larger scale when former President Barack Obama began singing it. I believe that was, I can't remember where he was singing that at, but it was found funny because that's such a culturally in tune song with the Black church, in spite of what some of the other omitted verses might have been saying. But again, with this piece here, it just really speaks to displacement. And a lot of these strollers, are something that's used by many homeless people in New York. And oftentimes you might see homeless using abandoned shopping carts. So again, these are things that the displaced people and the unacknowledged population of the homeless use to transport their items or things of personal relevance to them as an individual.
I remember we were talking about this yesterday as well, and I also found it to be relevant about my first initial reaction to the piece. I didn't realize that they were baby strollers at first. It just looked like a bunch of garbage. But the shape, the outline of the frame, especially the center, reminded me of that of a slave ship. And I find it really interesting that the thing at the core of this is displacement, because even that initial reaction is focused around that as well. You talk about the displacement of a culture of people, a whole continent's worth of people, and the displacement that they might have experienced from their homelands, from their families, and all the children that were taken away from their parents as well in that whole situation. So I like the fact that this particular piece strikes all these different interweavable conversations that are all focused around that same theme and idea.
Yes, beautiful, very astute. And until you mentioned that, I had not even picked up on the slave ship concept there. I think that's very telling, especially when you look at 300 to 400 years of systematic oppressions that have been put into place in this country. The idea of being born into bondage, in many ways, speaks to this as well. But let's look at some of his other work here. Here we have Soil Soul, a piece done by him. And what's interesting about this piece, I mean, when you look at it, it is a large, massive cluster of what looks like garments that displaced garments that once belonged to individuals. So when you think about the promise of America and the idea of people coming into Ellis Island and the huddled masses, that sort of thing. And we know that that American dream has not been fully realized by many people that are generations deep in being in this country. So I think Soil Soul, just the title itself, our souls are soiled with the oppressions of modern day history as well as past histories and centuries wide. So even in this detailed view of the piece, it's very telling how something that can look so random and discarded is assembled and organized in a way where it looks like it has presence, it looks like it has purpose. Imagine the homeless populations of the country registering to vote. Imagine the voices of the homeless being able to assemble themselves to speak up and speak out and hold these politicians accountable. So there are a mass of people that are disenfranchised, that are outside the framework. And of course, in this pandemic, a lot of the criticism due to the rhetoric surrounding the pandemic has been, well, the homeless aren't getting sick, the homeless aren't dying, but then again, we may not hear if they are. Because again, they're a mass that is often
disregarded.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. Here we see this piece called "We the People." You know, the thing about "We the People" is it's a term that we all can recognize for those of us that grew up with social studies, but the idea that it's kind of assembled in a way where it's recognizable, but it's also made up of various multicolored shoelaces, all right? And so even when you look at the idea of shoelaces, there's something that tie up your shoes or tie up your boots, and the idea that you can come to America and as long as you're willing to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, regardless of the oppressions in place, you should be able to make it in this country, right? But the idea of the "We the People" reminds you of street memorials with shoes thrown over tree branches or telephone wires that you often see in the inner city sometimes. But who is the "we" in this work that the piece is addressing, right? It might apply to everyone covered under the Constitution since the words come from its preamble, except that we know historically the Constitution hasn't been applied similarly or equally to people of the African diaspora. But in many ways, like Nari Ward himself, who was born in Jamaica and moved to the United States, again, he had these concentrated hopes and dreams of excelling in this country to come take advantage of better opportunity. But I just think this piece is very telling because it uses language to speak to the masses. And even if somebody may not be fully aware of the Constitution, if it's a new person coming into this country, this is something that at least lets people feel like they belong, right? A collaborative collection of voices, we the people. So here we see the "We the People" exhibition in full context here. And, I think it's interesting how we look at the bricoleur that he is assembled in full form here within this exhibition. Um, we've got the Apollo sign there to the side, of course, but then also too, we see some other pieces where he's taken somewhat recognizable objects. Not all of them are recognizable, right? But I think as long as you have an understanding with the weaving, we know that in terms of weaving in the United States, that's something that's been a very domestic craft that has utilitarian purpose, but also demands a certain amount of skill set, right? So I think how he uses that in the piece to the right of the Apollo sign, it's just kind of visually interesting how that works out. Yeah, so here we look at the Apollo pole that's located here in Milwaukee on Wisconsin Avenue. And, one thing about Milwaukee is it's already kind of got a reputation as one of the most segregated cities in the United States. But at the same time, it's a cultural melting pot.
Mm-hmm.
Even within that segregation, you have rich, vibrant ethnic cultures that are celebrated through wherever they're located in the city in terms of residents. And then also, really, it's shown quite a bit in the restaurant choices throughout the city. You can travel the world almost in terms of cuisine in Milwaukee. So probably the option of food is probably one of the greater benefits of that segregation in itself, right? So there's some benefit there, but the point I want to make is the Apollo sign in itself represents Black excellence in terms of the modern era popular culture within the last 50 to 75 years. And especially here in Milwaukee, in one of the most segregated cities, the Black population in this city is significant within this state. And one thing about seeing the Apollo pole sign on Wisconsin Avenue, it definitely implies a Black presence.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost to the point where if you see an Apollo sign in northern Wisconsin, you're gonna wonder where the Black people at. So and that's really what it's saying. But then, I think there's a lot to be said about how that speaks to the voter suppression efforts that Mary Lou just mentioned upon us getting started here. So, at the same time, I think it's significant that it's here. It represents a Black presence that's undeniable.
I'm also now drawing a specific connection between what you just said about this sign representing Black representation in itself and the fact that the duality of that also says polls has a huge emphasis on how much weight the Black vote in this particular city and state also holds for a lot of people. So I didn't even make that connection until now, just as I was looking and listening to what you were saying. So yeah, it's very, very interesting how intentional a lot of his messaging is with this particular piece.
Yes, absolutely. And even when we look at some of the earlier history of the Apollo Theater, we know in modern day popular culture that it is kind of like the hallmark. It's almost like the holy grail of Black performers. And but that being said, there, even with the documentary that was featured, the Apollo, as part of the Black Lens Film Festival last year, it really kind of brought to light, the significance of the Apollo Theater. And as being part of that Milwaukee, that Black Lens Film Festival, it chronicled the unique history and the contemporary legacy of the New York City landmark in itself. It was directed by Academy and Emmy Award winner Roger Ross Williams. It explores the current struggle that we as Black Americans face in America right now, the role that it plays in the struggle and the broad range of African American achievement that the Apollo represents. It also showcased the rich history and the storied performance space of over 85 years of internationally renowned performers, and how it influenced American pop culture really more than any other entertainment venue. But what's what's ironic about the Apollo Theater is that when it was founded in 1914, it was Hertig and Siemens' new burlesque theater.
Yeah.
At that time, you know, you think about something that was a burlesque theater that didn't allow Black people in it. African American patrons were not allowed, and they also did not have African American performers, right? But then in 1934, rather, the name was changed. It was acquired by new owners, and they took it upon themselves to specifically market to Black patrons and performers. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe they were Jewish owners. And so we know early 20th century in America, there was a kinship between Jew Americans and Black Americans. I think in many ways, the more compassionate Jewish population was compassionate toward the struggles of Black Americans in this country. Even when you look at the Harlem Renaissance in itself, the Harmon Foundation, which was led by Joseph Harmon, a Jewish businessman who felt it was important that African Americans be able to strive, do for themselves economically for the betterment of the whole collective economy of the country. So even though he had somewhat of a paternalistic attitude of helping the lowly Negro at the time, right? But he was onto something that was transformative, but also groundbreaking and revolutionary at the time. Because at a time of Jim Crow era, when disenfranchisement was the order of the day for Black Americans, the Harmon Foundation was instrumental in creating opportunities for Black visual artists to find patronage and opportunities to show their work, because many white galleries at the time did not permit Black artists to exhibit. So I just use that as a parallel, because the Apollo Theater in its inception created a space, or in its second inception rather, created a space for Black performers and then Black patrons as well to come and be entertained. But within that, there's still the idea of that exploitation, right? So when we look at many of the famous Black performers, depending on what their clout was like, oftentimes they could come, perform, receive the accolades and the cheers of the crowd, but then go home penniless, because the owners of the Apollo were notoriously known for not paying enough, or you having to chase them down to get your money. So
some things never change.
Yeah. So, you know, here we see again, much like the pandering of the Black vote now in this current and recent decades political climate, we see that the Black vote, in terms of the Apollo Theater, the Black vote made stars and brought about fame based on their acceptance and accolades of those performers. But oftentimes those performers who received that fame and accolade did not receive wealth or riches from that affiliation with the Apollo Theater. They had to go and make their name elsewhere in order to be rightly compensated. And so what you see is kind of a double exploitation, right? Because it takes the votes of the Black patrons to give the illusion of success and franchisement to those Black performers. But often what we see here is, just like the Black vote made stars of Black people, you know, at a time early in the American history, we see that the Black vote can make stars of politicians. And as long as they say the right words to appeal to the darker masses, oftentimes they can go on and claim that position politically, but hold no accountability as far as what they do for that mass of people that voted them in. But I just wanted to kind of bring some of those parallels to light. But, you know, when we think about it, the Apollo pole sculpture here in Milwaukee holds particular resonance in this historical moment, right? When belonging, access, and community are under attack constantly. While the Apollo's audience members get the vote for their favorite acts on amateur night at the Apollo, voter suppression tactics like gerrymandering and voter ID laws are designed explicitly to suppress participation in the democratic process, especially for people of color. So by linking entertainment to voting, I think Nari Ward was very clever in this, because we even see in modern times now with the recent endorsements of Kanye West for Donald Trump, or even most recently Ice Cube even discussing any sort of Black agenda or reparations package with Donald Trump. You know, we see that entertainers in the music industry, and even earlier, you recall, or maybe you don't recall, but James Brown, shortly after coming out with Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud, endorsed Richard Nixon, who was a staunch racist. And many of the fans of James Brown at the time kind of broke ties with him based on that affiliation, because we already know Richard Nixon was instrumental in really setting the template for the war on drugs, which was in fact the war on Black bodies.
I didn't know that. It's interesting.
Yes, yes. So there's been a history of you know, Black performers that may have gone against the grain of the broader Black culture in the country. But you know, I think what's interesting about the Apollo Theater is there's no denying the rich history and value it's brought to American popular culture, as well as kind of an aspiration of many Black performers over the decades.
Mm-hmm.
My earliest affiliation with knowing about the Apollo was as a child. One of my first original chores as a young boy was to put my dad's albums in the sleeves and then the correct sleeve into the jacket. So even with this album here, this was a staple musically in the household growing up, even to the point that when my parents would do cocktail parties, they would let me do my best James Brown impersonation as a 4-year-old for the adults, right? But even listening to this album here, it took you right there, you know, and in terms of bringing you to Harlem, New York. Great sound quality. You can't beat vinyl. Downloads and CDs can't match it. But again, that was my first introduction to it, even to the point where I remember asking my dad as a kid, I was like, wow, James Brown,
yeah,
like his band, he always sounds like he's really upset. And I'd see pictures of him, he's sweating and all frowned up, or watching him perform at the Apollo, you know, falling out, and they drape the cape over his shoulders, and he's so overwhelmed with the soul. I used to ask him, why is he so upset? He was like, well, he got soul. Like, oh, he got soul. He looks upset, you know. But the idea of the passion, you know,
yeah.
as a kid looking at photographs of soul performers.
I like the fact that he was able to capture that and present it to the country as well, because if I'm not mistaken, James was actually one of the first artists at the Apollo to film his concert live.
Yes.
Yeah, so he was able to, all that passion you were able to hear in the records, he was one of the first artists to be able to present into the artists, the American people. So that's really cool.
And the thing that's interesting about soul music is that it's a derivative, right? It's a derivative of the blues. It's a derivative of gospel. Mm-hmm. So it's really what brought those two genres together. Really, the claim to fame obviously would be like Sam Cooke or Ray Charles, having developed that genre in terms of the emotion, the passion, compelling, you know, ways of connecting with the audience. And so even when we look at the likes of Berry Gordy and creating Motown, the Motown Review is what really kind of made superstars of many of those early recording artists in the Motown stable. You know, Stevie Wonder, Marvin Gaye, the Supremes, of course, you know, Diana Ross, and just Diana Ross and herself set the template for what we would later see would become like the flamboyance of Grace Jones, Madonna, or even now Beyonce or Lady Gaga. You know, in terms of that diva status, we look at Marvin Gaye, who evolved from a pop singer into a socially conscious soul singer, where What's Going On was an album that Berry Gordy did not want to release because he felt like it went against the grain of the feel-good music of Motown at the time. But Marvin Gaye was compelled to speak out about the injustices. And I think that's very compelling. and even along with Motown, we have Stax Records. Motown out of Detroit, and then Stax Records out of Memphis. So you literally have this ping pong effect of the northern urban black soul expression, and then the southern urban black soul expression. So, you know, out of the Stax record stable, we had, you know, Otis Redding, the Bar Caves, and even most notably Isaac Hayes, who was the first African-American singer, songwriter, composer to win an Oscar for a motion picture soundtrack, which was Shaft. And then that same movie was directed by the first African-American Hollywood director, who was Gordon Parks at the time. So just, you know, I use those as an example of how even Stax Records, which was often compared to Motown, but had a little bit rougher, grittier sound and less polish, but it still manufactured superstars. Mm-hmm. And Otis Redding himself met an untimely death when his plane went down in Lake Monona here in Wisconsin. And I believe that was December 8th, 1967, if I'm not mistaken, or 1968. But again, you know, the impact of soul music on American culture is still being duplicated to this day, to the point where even Michael Jackson, as a child prodigy of that era, influenced decades of singers, songwriters, musicians, whether you want to talk about Justin Timberlake, Bruno Mars, Usher, and many others. The names go on, right? Mm-hmm. But along with that, again, my connection to the blues, growing up in the household where soul, blues, and jazz were the soundtrack of being at home and being raised, you know, I had the opportunity to meet a blues great, B.B. King. You know, B.B. King is, I guess we can think of as the first international blues superstar in many ways. And it was also something that was a main event. Anytime Black performers came on TV as a child growing up, it was time to everyone come into the living room, because you didn't see Black folks on TV doing too much than serving food or, you know, being criminals. So having the opportunity to meet B.B. King while I was living in Mississippi, when I was, you know, living there years after I obtained my master's degree, doing a lot of art workshops and exhibitions throughout Memphis, all the way down to the southern part of the Delta, which is a significant part of my patron base. Indianola, Mississippi, where BB is from, there is a BB King Museum and Interpretive Center. And every year he would return to Indianola to do a performance at Club Ebony, which is a historic juke joint located in Indianola, Mississippi. And he would also do workshops with kids. The location of what was Stax Records is now Stax Museum of Rhythm and Soul Music in Memphis. And so every year they would do summer arts music workshop. And this particular day that you see here was a day that BB was in town doing the workshop with kids who were bussed in from Memphis to Indianola to participate in the workshop with him. So the thing I find interesting and compelling about many blues musicians that I did meet while in Mississippi perform internationally, and no matter how successful or how many accolades they got, they always either resided home or returned home. Even though B.B. King did not live in Indianola, every year he came back to Indianola. And I think that's something that's significant about whatever the successes are, and BB being one of the few wealthy, successful blues musicians of the modern era. You can have accolades and travel the world, but they always come back home. And so on this particular day, what you see here, you know, I had done a festival exhibition, and I happened to have this in-process painting of B.B. King in my truck. And I said, I wonder if he'd be willing to sign my painting. So a good friend of mine, musician, educator, Alfonso Sanders, who was a professor at Mississippi Valley State at the time, said, you know, BB will be here shortly, and, you know, I'll introduce you to him and you can ask him. So I had a a giclée reproduction of another painting I had done of him. The piece he's signing is titled Memphis City Blues, and it's based off the map framework of Memphis. The first initial painting I did of him, and you can kind of see it just under his forearm there, was a piece called Indianola Blues, BB Indianola Blues, and it was based off the map of Indianola, Mississippi. So I gave him a giclée print of that piece and then asked if he would be willing to sign this piece. So it was really pretty much an iconic moment for me as an artist. And, you know, and I asked him, I said, do you mind if I take a picture with you? He says, I don't do commercials, young man. Okay? And so that's why you see me, the photograph being taken of me standing over his shoulder. But, you know, again, this being an iconic moment, it set into process for me seeking out other musicians who I had painted and getting them to sign their names. Now, what's crazy about this particular day, while waiting for him to arrive, I met Honey Boy Edwards in the parking lot and talked to Honey Boy Edwards for a significant amount of time. And I, you know, I even did a piece of him, but I unfortunately was not able to have him sign his before he passed. But what I was able to do was, being an artist in residence for the B.B. King Day music conference, I had an opportunity to meet band members of B.B. King's from studio recordings, the touring band members, as well as musicians who had played with Ray Charles and other great notables. So that particular conference, I had an opportunity to meet Bobby Rush, and I had already started a piece based on Bobby Rush, who is a Grammy winner, 2018 Grammy winner. And Bobby Rush signed a painting that I did of him. So really, those two Grammy winners signing artwork that I painted of them kind of bookends that Blues Routes series of mine. And so that was just significant for me in my career. But, you know, be free.
Yeah.
You as a performer, you as a singer-songwriter, I just like to kind of hear from you about the impact Apollo has had on you and your career.
Well, I think that I'm sure you can obviously relate. Growing up in the average Black American household, the Apollo was always just presented as this big grandeur, like knowing that it was this place where Black American artists would go not only to be discovered, but also to catapult their career onto like the mainstream trajectories that many of them had. Even not even truly understanding the full magnitude of that I would come to know of the theater, I always knew that it was a special place. But my earliest memories of seeing the theater, it was actually from another movie. When I was little, my family and I watched it. It came on TV actually first. It was a multi-night series called The Jacksons: An American Dream, which was a whole mini-series that was dedicated to the rise and start of that whole career that Michael and his brothers experienced under the guidance of their father. So I remember there was a point in the early part of their career where Michael and his brothers finally got the chance to go play the Apollo, and they stopped in the hallway, which is the infamous hallway that has that painting where you could see all the pictures of all the famous Black musicians that were played there before then. He was so in awe, specifically in finding the picture of James Brown, which, as we found, has been like a huge pinnacle artist representing the Apollo and its success and its people. And he was just so excited to be playing in the same space as one of his biggest influences. And I was like, that is so cool. You know, I think I had to be like maybe like 4 or 5 when it came out, but I always remembered that the look of adoration that he had in his eyes. And I was like, I want to be able to just capture that feeling and be able to, if I can ever get there, like I'm going to have that same exact level of excitement. So when I was in high school, I went to Milwaukee High School of the Arts. We were able to take a trip to New York City, and we stayed for a few days. We went, it was really for a music competition that the instrumentalists and the choral department took place in. But in between that, we got to do a bunch of other fun tourist things. I got to be on TRL, if anybody remembers what that is. I actually got my own little personal thing. I got to say in the camera, I introduced Jay-Z's song, Brush Your Shoulders On, so that was fun. But with that, also, we went to visit a lot of different landmarks, and we took a group trip to Harlem. And one of the things that we got to do was to visit the infamous Apollo Theater. So in this picture here, I am so bright-eyed and bushy-tailed. It's so funny. I was ecstatic. I was ecstatic because the tour guide did a wonderful job at just explaining the overarching prominence of the theater and the building in general, and how many different bodies and people actually came and graced that same stage. So to be able to go up and be on the same stage that literally all these prominent Black artists walked across themselves or performed on themselves, it spoke volumes to me. But this particular picture, which is also from back in the day when disposable cameras were still a thing, but it's the Tree of Hope. And everybody who knows about the Apollo or even watched the Apollo competitions on TV when it was televised, they know that this was something that was on the side of the stage that people would come and rub for good luck before they came and performed. And it was funny because in the movie I saw Michael and his brothers rubbing the same tree too, and then Michael went back and rubbed it extra long just to make sure he got a bit of that special essence with him. And this was a huge moment for me to be able to do that. But after doing more research, I feel even more proud about the fact that I got to touch this tree, because I didn't realize how much history itself it carried. So as you may know from looking into the Apollo and its essence and its genesis, we know that the original theater, the building, was not something that was open to Black patrons. However, once it was taken over, then they wanted to open it to make it something that was more accessible. But there was a building not too far from where it was located, over on 132nd Street, called the Lafayette Theater. And the Lafayette Theater was known as one of the earliest establishments in Harlem to be desegregated. And it was there that the first amateur night was actually introduced, the idea of it. And it was something that was hosted by Ralph Cooper. Ralph Cooper was an American artist, actor, and radio host, if I'm not mistaken. And it was so big over there. And this also was taking place in the middle of the Harlem Renaissance. So lots of famous Black artists or at the time aspiring Black artists came to the theater, and they would get their break there. But right in front of the theater, a little bit to the side, was this tree. And the tree kind of sat in the middle of the theater and all these other prominent buildings, and that whole street was known as the Boulevard of Dreams. So around the mid-30s, the city ordinance had decided that they wanted to renovate that whole street, and they had to tear down some buildings and a few of the pieces of, foliage that were around it. And with that, the tree itself had to get cut down. And people were so shocked because this tree itself represented such a symbol of Black excellence, of good luck, and all these great things. And what they did was, when they cut the tree down, they actually ended up selling pieces of it. Like they cut it up, and they were giving out and selling pieces of it for good luck, because people looked at it that way. And the stump was still there. Like the stump of where the tree was at was still there in front of the Lafayette Theater. And even after it was gone, folks would come and still rub that. There's pictures all over the internet of all these famous Black artists still coming and rubbing the stump itself for good luck, whenever they would go on to do something at the Lafayette or wherever have you in that area. So Ralph Cooper, the original host of the amateur night at the time, he bought the biggest chunk. Like he took about, I would say, 18 inches wide of the tree stump and brought it to where the new Apollo was going to be. And then in 1934, before they had their first amateur night, he had it shellacked and he had it sanded and mounted. And he placed it on the side of the stage so that it would be visible not only by the audience, but the first thing that everybody would see when they would come out on stage. So that whole idea of continuing the whole good luck and the Tree of Hope and what it was giving to people and artists, he was able to embody that by having a part of the tree there in the theater as well. So that's how that whole thing came to be. And I thought that was so amazing. So my little 16-year-old self in this tree didn't realize the magnitude of how much was actually going into me touching that log. So I thought that was really cool. And not to mention the fact that we're talking about Nari and the whole bricolage act of that. This tree itself represents that, because it was a completely different entity. It was a whole tree by itself over there at the Lafayette Theater. And then once it was torn down and broken up, something that could initially be intended as firewood or garbage was taken and repurposed in so many different ways, because not only was it given out to folks, but they were able to take a hunk of it and make it be this new symbol of hope and good luck for all artists that were to touch it. So I think that's extremely symbolic as well, as far as the relevance between Nari's work and his Apollo piece and the stump. So the next picture is just a photo of me. I had to get that same Apollo sign that's out, which is exactly what Nari modeled his piece after. But my favorite picture is the one on the bottom, because this is the infamous hallway that has all of the paintings of the artists that play there. And we already talked about the number of folks that came through there. And the fact that it started off as something completely different, but kind of segued into something else is really cool to me. It may have been like this vaudevillian kind of vibe when it first got started, but then started opening itself up to more musical essences at first. Like Duke Ellington played there, Chick Webb, the Nicholas brothers, the famous black tap dancers, played there. I love them. I used to teach about them during February Black History Month for my students. I found that really cool. And then it was one of the challenges, that's the tour guide there on the bottom, was to see how many different artists we could name by pointing out, because there's a lot. Like it's seeing it in itself, in its essence, in person is a lot more impactful than the picture. But I was able to point out a couple of faces, but as I've grown older and more learned about Black history, and as far as music is concerned, I can point a few more. But it was so awesome, and I had this really great feeling. I was like, I want to see my face up there one day, as a young musician, and it was just so cool, because I went back to that moment when I first saw this picture on TV when young Michael was looking at it in the movie. And there was a whole feeling of full circleness coming to me, because he was having the same aspirations for himself that I was now experiencing, looking at all these people that play there, all these people that have influenced my culture and my music. And it was just a really great feeling. And I also want to point out that Ella Fitzgerald, her picture's up there too, and she was actually the very first winner of the amateur night at Apollo at a mere age 15. So that was all really cool.
Now, let me piggyback on that a little bit, because actually, and the venue escapes me, but there was a venue that would not allow Ella Fitzgerald to play, and Marilyn Monroe, who had befriended Ella Fitzgerald and looked at Ella Fitzgerald as her champion, oddly enough. Yeah. Marilyn Monroe had took the stand that she went to that club owner and said, well, if you allow Ella Fitzgerald to play here, I will sit at the front table every night.
That's what's up.
Play. And so just Marilyn Monroe saying that and being present in the audience drew the crowd to the establishment. And then along with that too, the greatness of the musicians prior to the, when rock and roll was a relatively new music genre, you had Frank Sinatra, a young balladeer who, as he came into his maturity as a singer, took on the Count Basie Orchestra. Yeah, as his band. And then also under the guidance of the young Quincy Jones as band leader and director. So Frank Sinatra desegregated Las Vegas because his attitude was, well, if my band can't come in the front door and stay at the hotel with me, then you all don't want me to play here. Yeah. And so between his attitude and then whatever other ties he had in the city, he made sure that those Black musicians were treated with dignity, honor, and respect. And on another side note, and I don't know if this may be true or not, it was brought to my attention, Al Jolson, the famed vaudevillian blackface performer, who himself was a Jew, okay? It was brought to my attention that he was the only vaudeville performer that allowed Black performers in his troupe to perform on stage without blackface. And he allowed them to perform with dignity as they were as individuals, even though he performed in blackface. And apparently when he died, a number of those old vaudevillian performers attended his funeral in honor of the fact that he allowed them to perform with dignity and their natural faces. So I thought that was something very poignant just in that alone, as far as advocacy, which I like to call the abolitionist spirit, right? Those maybe white individuals who look upon humanity as the primary focus. And that, I'm back. Sorry about that.
That's okay.
I don't know where I cut off at, but you as a musical bricoleur, and you know, like I said, from times I've seen you perform, I hear the gospel. You know, I hear the R&B. I hear the blues. I hear the neo soul. So you as a bricoleur of music, share with us a little bit about, you know, some of those influences that have helped you become the performer that you are.
Well, obviously, all the folks who are the classics were people who I was earliest exposed to. Michael, I keep mentioning him, but I love him so much. I love the fact that he has such a deep history with the Apollo itself. And he's also a Virgo, which I am too. So I take pride in that. No, but I really didn't really find my musical identity until I would say I was in my early teens. And I have this chunk of women specifically who I feel like have helped me craft my general presence in music over the last few years as I began that developmental journey. And those are the 6 women that you see here in this piece. One of the first ones, she's down there at the bottom left, is Brandy. Now, Brandy has been on my television ever since I was a little girl. She first came on the scene acting on this television show called Thea. And I was like, okay, that's really cool. That's cute. But it wasn't until she came back a couple of years later with her own television show called Moesha. And I was just like, oh, you know, one of my things when I was younger, besides wanting to be a musician, I wanted to be a teenager. Like that was my aspiration. That was what I wanted to be. I could not wait to become a teenager. And I felt like she made it look so fun and so carefree and all the different things that I just could not wait to experience. She was living out that I was living vicariously through her on TV. So she has always been like this cool representation of everything I've ever wanted in life. You know, aside from being a teenager, she was a musician and I loved her music. Like hearing all the early stuff of I Want to Be Down. You know, I've been singing ever since I was a little girl. So being able to sing along with those things was really, really cool. And I always kept that at the forefront of my mind, especially as she got older and started developing more of her craft and her sound, that she was just a huge, huge inspiration to me. So Brandy was the first person that I saw that made me want to do what she did in entertainment in general. So later on, around, I would say, early high school, late middle school, I was then introduced more hardcore into the neo soul movement. Now, obviously, it started in the 90s from general standpoints. We had Erykah Badu and the Roots on the scene, but this woman named Jill Scott came out in the year 2000, and I was completely floored because I had never seen anybody like her, that looked like her, that sounded like her on the radio, let alone on my television in that day and age. Obviously, soul music caters to a lot of different types of people, different sizes and shapes and demographics, but I found it completely inspirational to see this woman with natural hair, you know, singing soul music and, you know, just singing from the top of her lungs. And she was the first person that I was like, I want to craft my whole presence after. Like, I loved the feeling of that her presence evoked within me. And I knew that I wanted to be able to evoke that within people who listened to me when I performed. So she was the pinnacle idea for me as far as that. Other women you see posted in the picture, there's a woman by the name of Vivian Green, who also is in the neo soul movement. And ironically, she got one of her early starts singing backup for Jill Scott, which is a funny collection there. But oh my God, Vivian Green, her first mainstream album, A Love Story, is literally that. Like it was, it was the most amazing piece of work. It didn't feel like music, you know what I mean? Like the words washed over me so easily. It felt like I was listening to poetry. So Vivian is one of my biggest inspirations as far as my writing. Everything that entire album from beginning to end completely speaks to me, especially when you're going through heartbreak in high school. But I really loved the fact that the words that she was singing made me feel that way. So she has been my biggest inspiration as far as trying to craft the same idea of literature, musical literature, that would make people feel that same type of feeling. Right after her, there's a woman who's not really well known by a lot of people, but her name is Tidra Moses. Now, when I was in high school, I used to go to Borders a lot after school. If you remember the Grand Avenue when it was in its, essence in the 2000s, you can go to Borders and they had those headphones and you could scan a CD underneath and you can listen either to a sample of the songs, but sometimes you would get lucky and they would play the whole thing. And that's literally how I spent my days after school. I would go from arts, I would take the 31 down to the Grand, and I would go to Borders. I would stop at the food court, get some Rocker Rococos. Then I would go to Borders, and then I would just listen to music. And it was so cool picking up all these different people. And I would pick up CDs just from folks who looked interesting or looked like me. If you look like you can sing, I would listen to you. And I had no idea who she was. She was completely unknown. So I just sat there in Borders, and I was blown away by her voice. Her voice is completely immaculate. Like it's so carefree. Her voice floats and it's so soulful. And then later on, I would hear her first single at that time with Jadakiss was playing on V100 all the time. So I was like, oh my gosh, that's that same woman whose CD I bought. So I went back to Borders and bought the CD because I was like, no, this she's gonna be a thing. And then when I listened to the whole thing over and over again, Tidra was who I would like to try to emulate my melodic development after with my voice, because I really loved all the different directions that she would make hers go in. So I tried to really appeal to that same thing when I was creating my music. The four other women you have here, Esperanza Spalding. She represents so many things for me, but what I love about her is she incorporates her jazz into whatever else she wants to do. And being a musician at Arts, we had to study, classical forms of music. I actually was a triple major by the time that I graduated as a senior. I was in the wind ensemble with flute, playing classical music, but I also was a member of the jazz lab in the jazz department, and also was a member of vocal jazz. So a lot of my formal training as far as instrument and voice is concerned started in jazz. So I found it really interesting that she was able to take that same idea and incorporate it into other styles. Because even though jazz is at the helm of my training, it's not really like the only thing or like the main thing that I consider myself to be a part of. Because I love soul music, I love R&B, I love lots of different things. But she was able, when I saw her, and I didn't discover her until college, she's an upright jazz player, jazz bass player, who I'd never seen a woman ever do in my entire life. So the fact that she was able to embody that, and her voice was still singing stylistically relevant to R&B and soul, and then every album she's made after that has delved into any different types of style that she liked, but I can always hear jazz at the center of what she has been doing. So for that, Esperanza is a huge inspiration to me, because jazz is always going to be at the center and nucleus of everything that I do as well. No matter what different directions I like to dabble in or grow from, that's always going to be the center of where I kind of got my intellectual start as well. And then, of course, we have Janelle Monáe. Janelle, I didn't discover until definitely when I was an undergrad in college. And she was this quirky woman that I saw on the internet who was just dancing in this black and white suit. And I was like, who is this girl? But when I listened to the stuff that she was saying, I'm like, oh, she's really talking about some heavy things. And she sounded amazing. Every time I would see her thereafter, always black and white, no matter what. It was always that suit. And then I found out the reason behind it was because, she was kind of paying homage to the working class that her parents came from. And she felt like, that was her uniform. Like she was going to wear the same type of thing every day. And she was going to make that just be her blanketed appearance. And you were just going to listen to what she had to say. And then over the years, it was super cool to watch her take that same idea and develop it into different, like, it wasn't always a black and white suit. It was a black and white dress, or, you know, black and white, you know, special made outfit. And she just eventually made it to like become like a cover girl and, you know, model in Paris. Like, I thought that was so inspirational. But Janelle has always stayed true to her individuality and her idea and her for herself. And she started off independent. Like, her label and her helm is underneath the umbrella of the Bad Boy Entertainment. Mm-hmm. However, when she first started, it was all her. You know, she got with her friends in college in Atlanta. They made their own general record label. And even today, like, she is still the CEO of Wonderland Records. Like, she is the first woman CEO of a record label that I had ever seen, especially seeing her coming from literally grassroots was always like amazing. So the fact that I got to literally go on stage right before her at Summerfest was like the biggest thing in the world to me. And she still remains to this day to be one of my biggest inspirations, to always try to strive for individuality as well as my bossiness. You know, so these women here, I consider to be my top 6 women influences of all time.
That beautiful, you know, yeah. That's a great kaleidoscope of soul. But you know what though, just to add on to your whole Janelle Monáe experience, in the early days of me doing the Funk Festival, I believe it was after the initial first year in 2010, I was looking at the lineup for the 2011 Community Arts and Funk Festival, and a good friend of mine said, "Oh man, you know, you ought to check out this sister from Chicago named Janelle Monáe." Now, this is before she really blew up. Uh-huh. And then it was, you know, later brought to my attention that Big Boy from Outkast is really who kind of pulled her in, right?
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay, Janelle Monáe. But much like yourself, you know, taking the bits and pieces of these other performers and creating your own persona, she's like the only female performer I can think of that took from Prince and James Brown and Grace Jones and rolled it together, and she became herself.
Absolutely.
Much like Prince took from James Brown, Little Richard, Sly Stone, and Jimi Hendrix and became himself. So it's great to hear you honestly pay homage to Jill and how you modeled yourself, because when I describe you to people who have never seen or heard you perform, I say, imagine a Jill Scott, Angie Stone who play flute. They're like, damn, really? I'm like, absolutely. You know, but what's beautiful is you are be free. You don't look like you're trying to be a Jill Scott wannabe or an Angie Stone wannabe. But what's clear is they've inspired you and influenced you, you know? So I think all that's really great.
Thank you.
But, you know, now kind of getting back to the whole deal here of the purpose of music in society, and namely in Black culture, how do you think Black music can be used in bringing awareness to voter suppression, racial injustice, or calling people to action? We know that protest music with Curtis Mayfield and the Impressions, or even some of the later early 70s stuff by James Brown, or even What's Going On by Marvin Gaye. So how do you think it can be used now?
I think this particular day and age, our people are a little bit more desensitized to the messaging that is attempted to be brought forth with the music, but I do think it still holds a lot of value and weight. You brought up some really great examples of how music has been used to talk about different political messaging. And even with like the last 10 years of campaigning, you know, they've had Black artists and folks who have gotten on like particular shows that were all about rock the vote. You know, that was like the big thing over the last decade, using these artists and using these people and these faces to promote to our culture and this demographic about the importance of voting. And I do still think it holds a great deal of weight. I think that being able to try to encompass multiple meanings behind why they're pressing that is helpful within music. So people that are not just singing about vote or die, you know, but also saying like, you know, this is what this leads to, or this is also an important issue, you know, that has to do with voting. I think that music is the most prominent way to do that, because people have differences in opinions, people have differences in thoughts, or even ways that they might sway when it comes to voting. But everybody knows how to listen to music. You know, everybody can hear good music, you know, whether they agree with what the messaging is or not. So I would like to think that the subliminal undertones that music can carry over definitely holds a great deal of weight still in today's day and age. And I would like to see that continue here out. I know that next week is going to be crazy, but I would just hope that people can still find value in that and using music as a vehicle for important messaging.
Yes, definitely. I know we're a little bit over our time here. We could kind of start wrapping up, but I'm going to kind of ask you a multi-layer series of questions here, right? One is I definitely want you to expand upon what kind of opportunities are here in Milwaukee for young aspiring Black performers. And, there is like the Backline with 88.9 and 414 Live. And I know those are some platforms. So I'd like you to kind of speak on what are some of the platforms now that can offer access or opportunity to young Black singer-songwriter performers. And then within that, just speak on how you allow what you do to inspire the youth.
Okay. Well, I think that there's been a lot of different attempts over the last few years at trying to create a space that encompasses all of that. I can even recall in my young days, like as a teenager, they had a version of Apollo here in the city as well. It was the Apollo at the Pabst Theater. And I actually had the opportunity to perform in that as a teenager, as a child. But I knew that that was a thing that everybody also wanted to aspire to be a part of as well as adults, because it was almost a general replica of that same thing. And from that experience, I was able to be connected with some really interesting and influential people just from being in the audience. So I can only imagine what that might have done for the adult performers at that time, as far as being connected with folks who could help them push their careers or their performance opportunities even further. I know that it's not really functioning right now, and I don't know if there's one particular definitive space that can really hold all of those things as far as that weight right now. There's different venues throughout the whole city. I know that if you look at the north side, the most prominent thing that probably comes to mind is Mr. J's. Mr. J's over on Fond du Lac Avenue. Everybody frequents there. And not only do they allow opportunities for local Black musicians, but they also host other national artists in that space as well. So being able to be in that same space with these folks, from that I know, especially with my ear to the Milwaukee music scene, I know people have been able to make connections with them as well, that have likely led to some other creation of performance opportunities. So I think having spaces like that where people can feel comfortable enough to go on their own on a regular basis will also make it more accessible to getting there when there's more prominent folks that might be able to help you move along and do that is really cool. I know that with the programs like Backline that we have at 88.9, the overarching goal is to try to put Milwaukee music in a position where people will take notice. And it was really disappointing to everybody when the DNC didn't happen. Obviously, things have to follow their own course. But I know for a fact there were a lot of venues, a lot of places, a lot of spaces that were planning on really catapulting the local music scene up to the forefront and showing all these people from all over the country and world what it is that we're capable of doing. So being able to try to find spaces and utilize that same momentum is going to be key for us. I know that 88.9 does very much attempt to still do that with the programs like Backline, with 414 Live, with the Radio Milwaukee Music Awards. But it would be interesting to see if over the next few years there will be this one definitive space that will be considered the breaking area or the breaking grounds for Black artists. So that's something that you have to keep in mind.